All right, we are now recording. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to our first actual online webinar for our historic preservation workshops. Normally, of course, we do these face-to-face, but in light of the current world that we live in, we felt like this might be a good alternative. Although hopefully for our next one, which I believe is in August, maybe September, I apologize for not knowing. We're hoping to meet back at Hyperion's beer garden in the back. So if there's another opportunity where we feel it's not safe, it's nice to know that we have a backup. So we appreciate Christian Popoli for spending his Thursday night with us. I'm going to tell you, the partnership that SPAR has with HPC is just absolutely perfect, and I can't tell you how much we appreciate the communication that you give, the work, the feedback, the input. It's great to have you through the City of Jacksonville's partnership, and it's great to pass everyone's complaints off to you. So, yeah, it's nice for that kind of welcome that we can give you. So, all right, we are going to do a little bit of a general overview of the COA process, which is what pretty much everyone is questioning about. They constantly ask us. There's constant discussions on the Facebook group, all of this. And so just kind of the general overview. And then I think there's going to be some specific talks on the solar panels and the options and suggestions on making that happen. And then there will be some time for general Q&A. I really urge any of y'all to ask specific questions because this is a perfect opportunity. But if not, and if you have some questions that pop in your mind after the fact, Christian and his staff are very easy to get on the phone. They're very receptive and responsive on email. So please feel free to reach out to them for any other issues or questions you may have. So I'm going to stop talking now. I wanted Christian to go ahead and begin. And like I said, if you do have any questions that you're scared that might, you forget or whatever, feel free to use the chat box and we will read out those at the end of the presentation. Now, thank you very much, Christian Popoli with HPC Commission. You've got the floor.
Thank you. Just to echo that, it's really nice to have neighborhood organizations that are out there helping us keep an eye on things and doing public outreach and all the things we would love to do if we had time and staff and money. But I will have our contact information up towards the end or at the beginning or both. So you can get in touch with us if you need to. I would say this week and next week, because we're playing a lot of catch up from being out of the office, we're not as responsive as we normally are, but we're working on it. So, I will see if I can get the screen share working, and I'll just jump into the presentation, and then we can go from there. All right. So we're going to go to this. Okay. So there's all the contact information. I'll leave that up for a minute, so if anyone wants to copy it down or do a screen capture, they can. This is all generic contact information that all of us have access to. We've got one, the historic preservation email drop that we all have access to. The 7800 number is the main number for the planning department. So we have some other extensions, obviously, for us personally, but this is the best way. If you need to get a hold of somebody, there's usually somebody who can answer the phone who's around. So, and then we have a web page, obviously. And that has information on it. Usually we're having some technical issues with ADA access at the moment, so it's not as flush with information as it normally is, but again, we're working on that. So to go into the process, briefly a explanation. So a certificate of appropriateness is in essence a type of permit that the city issues. It's specific to historic preservation, and it's specific to the historic districts like Springfield and Riverside. And the purpose is we basically review exterior changes to properties and structures to ensure that they are meeting the historic preservation regulations. So we protect the houses in the neighborhood and all of its resources. So that's what we're talking about. This is the technical definition from our code. Lengthy and code-like. It's section 307 of the municipal code if you're really interested in reading the whole thing. But in essence, what it says is, I can move this thing out of my way. It's a way that, like I said, we regulate the work that goes on houses and businesses and the properties associated with them. It's, like I said, limited to historic structures in the districts. They come in several flavors. For big projects or things that are outside of what the staff can approve, have to go before an appointed body, which is the Historic Preservation Commission. They are a 7-member panel that has a fairly diverse group of people, from architects to engineers to general contractors and business owners and a few attorneys. They all have some connection to preservation. A lot of them live in districts between Riverside and Avondale, and I don't think we have anyone from Springfield on there currently that we have in the past. And some of them work in preservation. Some of the architects do preservation work. One of the contractors builds a lot of infill structures in Riverside. So they have a lot of experience, and they've been, for the most part, doing this for between 3 to 5 years, depending on who it is. So they're a good group of people, and they review stuff that's, like I said, larger scale. So things like new homes that are built or really substantial renovations. And then a lot of your routine stuff that you need to take care of your house, putting a new roof on, fixing up your porch, that kind of stuff, we handle at the staff level. So hopefully it makes things quicker. You don't have to worry about getting on an agenda, and the commission only meets monthly, so it can be some time consuming for bigger projects. But the other benefit is things that go before the commission have fees associated with them, because there are staff hours involved and notice signs and advertising and things like that goes on. So anything that we can do at the staff level is free, and usually we turn it around in a few days to a week, depending on how busy we are. So that's one of the benefits, and we try and do as much as we can at the staff level, and we're always trying to tweak what we can do through the commission. So just to try and make it easy for everyone when we can. So when are they required? As I said, it mostly deals with the exterior of sites. We're looking at things like major alterations, additions. If you have to change out the floor of your porch, which happens quite a bit. And a lot of times we get into things that you wouldn't necessarily think about, like driveways, sheds, re-roofs, windows, obviously. One of the things we talk about, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. But basically, there's only a handful of things that don't require COAs, landscaping and things like that. So when in doubt, you're always welcome to call us, and you're always welcome to ask any questions over the email. And we're happy to look up your property. We've got historic records on a lot of properties, and can provide not just regulatory stuff, but also advice. And we know a lot of contractors, and so we can put you in touch with people if you have questions that are really specific. We try and be as much of a resource as we can, because owning an old home is kind of like owning an old boat. They require a lot of work, and they require some specialized skills. So we try and be a resource for you guys. I keep thinking that's going to work. So when are they not required? Things like painting your house. Most of the homes in Springfield are wood-sided in some capacity. So things like painting them isn't a big deal. Most things that go on inside the house we don't get into. So if you move a wall or add a kitchen or renovate a bathroom, we don't really get into that. The only time we do is if it somehow affects the outside of the house. A lot of times, showers were added to bathrooms over the years, and the wood windows don't do so well with the constant moisture. So you may have to replace a window when you do a bathroom renovation. So that's where we would get involved, because it affects the outside. Like I said, a lot of routine maintenance we don't really get into. So if you've got to touch some stuff up here and there, or if you're going to wallpaper your bathroom, we don't care about that. But again, you're always welcome to ask. We're happy to answer questions. One thing I'll touch on, and it's been an issue in Springfield as of late, unfortunately, unpainted brick structures, or block in some cases, painting those is something that does require review. A lot of times, painting unpainted brick surfaces is not something that usually is approved, and it's also potentially detrimental to the structure. Because these buildings were built with different technologies than we have now, the way they move moisture from one side of a building where it's, not in the rain to the outside where it is in the rain, water actually flows back and forth through the joints of the bricks. And when you paint them, you trap that water sometimes, and it can cause faster deterioration to the house. So there are technical reasons why we do that, but it's also regulatory. So again, feel free to ask. So where COA is required? As I said, we have a couple of designated historic districts. We have Springfield, obviously you're familiar with if you live there. And then we have Riverside and Avondale. And then we also have the St. John's Quarter, which is this little guy here. Each district has specific regulations that are associated with it. So Springfield has a different set of guidelines than Riverside, and there's some very good reasons for why. So it's a certificate of appropriateness. What is appropriate? Well, that's derived from two different documents. One is specific to the district. So as you can see, we have the Springfield historic guidelines here. And then there are a national set of criteria that are called the Secretary of Interior Standards for Historic Preservation and Rehabilitation. And those are sort of the overreaching guidance from the National Park Service, which is where the National Register of Historic Places is kept. And those were used to derive our guidelines. These are considered more general, and these are very specific to the style of homes and architecture in Springfield. But we look at both of those when we're reviewing projects. This is kind of an example of what the guidelines look like. These documents were produced for Springfield back in '91. And so we don't actually have a true digital version. We have some scanned copies and a lot of printed copies, but we're hoping to update this at some point. But it's got some very detailed language. What does it actually mean? Well, it gives general framework for how you work on your house, replace things, alter things. And it's phrased in things like things are encouraged and discouraged. And the reason for that is it's very hard to write a document that has a high level of specificity when you're dealing with a lot of different types of architecture and different types of construction. What makes a house historic, first and foremost, is it has to be 50 years old. And then from there, there's a whole slew of criteria that were used to create the districts. But being 50 years old, it can certainly be older. And Springfield's a good example as compared to Riverside. A lot of the houses are from the early 1900s in Springfield, whereas Riverside and Avondale, some of them are into the 40s and 50s. So there's a broad different types of architectural styles. So it speaks in generalities to things like how to deal with windows and siding, but doesn't get into this house should have these kind of windows. That's where some of our older records come in handy. But generally it talks about things like restoring features over replacing them. Windows are the example I like to use. The way to wrap your head around what we do is that we're not just trying to preserve the look of old houses. We're trying to preserve the actual history of the house. And that is really created through the materials that it's built out of, the style of architecture, the methods of construction. So keeping the old window and repairing it versus replacing it with a new window is really the goal, because that old window was built typically by hand out of materials you can't get anymore, like types of wood or old growth wood that is a lot more durable than the quick growth pine that we use now for construction. So preserving those materials has a lot of benefits, not just from a philosophical standpoint, but those windows have lasted 100 years for a very good reason. Modern wood windows require more maintenance, they require more painting because they don't hold up as well. So if you've got a window that needs a little bit of work, it's much better to fix it than to replace it. In a lot of cases, it can be cheaper because our guidelines talk about using like materials over modern materials. So if you've got a historic wood window and you're looking to replace it because it's really deteriorated, our guidelines would dictate that it needs to go back with a wood window. And that wood window, like I said, may not be made as well because the materials are different. and the cost for a new wood window may be more expensive than repairing the one you have. There are a lot of guys out there that do window and door restoration work that specifically have the tools and the skill set to take an old window apart, fix the parts that are broken, put in pieces of wood that replace the rot, put them back in your house. So that's kind of the gist of what we're talking about. But there are cases where modern materials make sense. If all the windows are gone from the house, we don't really have that history anymore, then we're not as concerned with you going back with a wood window necessarily. There's more flexibility. And that, again, comes from those national guidelines that talk about that flexibility, and then our local guidelines, which also incorporate that. When we get into using modern materials, then we're talking about replicating design as well as using more modern materials. So things like multi-light windows where you've got several panes that make up the sash of the window. You're going to replicate that because that's what would have been in the house originally if we have that information, if we have those historic records. And then a lot of little details. So windows that have multiple panes of glass historically have little wood frames with little panes of glass in them. Modern windows are manufactured with just one big pane of glass, and then the things that make up those grids are called muttons, and they're placed either between the two panes of glass or on the surface. Because the historic windows were actually constructed with, a frame there, they stick out. So it's called a raised mutton. And we require, when you put in new windows that have those patterns, that they also have a raised exterior mutton on them, because that mimics what would have been there, and it looks more accurate. So it gets, like I said, very nuanced, and that's why we're here, and we get the time and effort and training to handle that kind of stuff. And again, these guidelines are really specific to making sure that the work that goes on your house is correct for your house, but also takes into consideration the impact the work will have on your neighbors and the district, because the thing that makes Springfield isn't necessarily your house, but it's your house and every other house that's historic that creates the neighborhood, and that's what gives it distinction, and that's why it was designated. So there are very specific individual properties that sometimes rise to a higher level, and those are designated through a local landmark process. But most of the time, places like Springfield and Riverside, it's the culmination of all the houses that make up the distinct, unique historic character. So we're looking at all those things. A lot of this comes into play with like infill houses as well. So we want to make sure that they blend in and don't, look too out of place, but there's more flexibility with that. I went through some of the Secretary of Interior standards and how, again, you have to meet both of the criteria. So COAs are broken down into categories, so to speak. A lot of this has to do with how we address the permitting system that we use, which I'll get into in a minute. But basically, the idea is they're broken into categories that represent really the things we see the most. So there is a miscellaneous category, but we get a lot of, especially in Springfield, people want to build garages, which may require driveways, or they may be accessed off an alley. Additions, a lot of these older homes weren't built to handle, the modern conveniences of life. The kitchens were small, the bathrooms were small, so you may want to add on to your house, which is allowed. Window replacement, it's a big thing. That comes up a lot, especially in Springfield, because a lot of these houses, unfortunately, lost their windows throughout the years. And then new construction for infill in some of these, vacant lots throughout the neighborhood. Each one of these has a specific set of requirements as far as the kind of information we need to collect to help you get through the process and, render an opinion and give you advice. So for like new construction, we're going to be looking for, renderings of the building, the materials you're going to use, the site plan for where it's going to be on the property. Versus like window replacement, we want an inventory of all the windows that are still in the house. We want to know what kind of windows you plan on putting back in there. So it's a little different for each application. And when I go through our system, you can kind of see how that works as far as the things you have to include with your application. All of our applications are online now. People who've been, involved with preservation over the years, we did a lot of things just through paper. Thankfully, we were able to get this online process going before we were under lockdown. It allowed us to continue doing our job while we were working from home. But basically, and I'll walk through how this works, but you create a username and log in, put in your property information, and then you upload those attachments and give us a description of the kind of work you want to do. The system emails us. We're notified that the application's there. We can pull down all the information, review it, get in touch with you if we have questions, and then send you the completed copy. All that's very important because if you have to pull a building permit, they will not process it unless you have an approved COA for the work. So that's one of the ways we kind of handshake with the building department. The system was designed a long time ago, and it was designed predominantly for land use and zoning applications. So it is the Land Use and Zoning Application Portal is the official name, and the acronym is LUZAP. It's part of the web address, which is why it's really important. But when you first log on, it's going to look like it has nothing to do with us, and that's because it didn't when they created the system years ago. But it is a one-stop shop for all of your applications. So people who are doing, new construction potentially may have to do some zoning work and things like that, and they can file all those applications through this one system. As I mentioned earlier, the administrative COAs are free. Things that go to the commission vary by the scope, but generally they're between $300 and $500. And again, that covers the cost of the staff time, the signs that we hand out, the room that we use for the commissioners and training for the commissioners and all that kind of stuff. Honestly, it doesn't cover all of our costs. We don't really even break even, but it's part of the process. So those fees are actually set by City Council. We have nothing to do with them. So please contact your district councilman if you don't like them. The commission, as I said, meets once a month, typically the fourth Wednesday of the month, though depending on holidays that may be different. Typically the deadlines are for submittal of a COA to be on the next commission agenda. We want to see it kind of the last week of the month before. Our deadline for payment is the first week of the month usually. So we want to make sure that what you've given us is everything we need so we can write a staff report and take that to the commission. So we want to get it ahead of time before that final deadline so we can review it, sign off on it, give you your invoice, and you can go and pay that all ahead of time so there's no, misunderstandings about when things happen. Part of that process is we're going to give you, you've probably seen them before, it's a blue sign, kind of the size of a real estate sign. That has all the information on the hearing, when it's going to take place, where it's going to take place. And that's the way we notify anyone else who may want to come and talk about your application. Because again, the work that you do on your house can affect your neighbors and can affect the district as a whole. So people, are concerned about that kind of stuff. And as Kelly said earlier, a lot of people complain and get upset when things happen that they're not used to. So they come to us with that. And it's all part of a public hearing process. So this is the way we notify the neighborhood. Once we get the application in and you've paid for it, we prepare a staff report where we kind of explain everything to the commissioners, provide our recommendations and potentially conditions for the proposal. So we may specify the kind of windows you're looking at using or the way you put your siding on, stuff like that, to again work compatible with the house and with the district. Things that go before the commission makes the final decision. They issue a final order that you'll get a copy in the mail. We'll typically email it to you as well. And you'll provide that with your building permit, and that becomes kind of your approved COA. And then the building department are actually the one that enforces those conditions for us. Again, so these are our deadlines. This calendar, I think, is still on the website. Like I said, we're having some technical website issues at the moment, but we can always send you a copy by email. The next payment deadline is the beginning of July, and our next meeting is actually next week. This will be kind of like this, a Zoom meeting, so it's going to be a first for us. We're hoping it goes well. But all the information for that is on our website if you want to tune in and kind of see how it works if you've never done it before. Digital applications. So aside from different types of COAs, we also have different applications as well. For complicated COAs that went before the commission, sometimes you need to make a little change to it when you actually get to construction. So we have administrative modifications to those that we can do. Again, there's kind of a scope for what we can do versus it has to go back to the commission. But a lot of times, if you decide that maybe you want to change the fence style or you were going to put, one kind of siding on there and now you want to do something else, we may be able to do that, without having to drag it all back to the commission. For really big projects, sometimes we get opinions of appropriateness, in which case a developer may come in with a project that has a multifamily structure or something, and they want to get feedback from the commission to make sure they're going in the right direction before they invest a lot of money and time in architects and engineers. So occasionally we get those. The online system is designed to be searchable and transparent, so anyone in the public can look at the application, download the attachments, get an idea of what's going on. The system allows us to put a QR code on the sign, so you can scan that with your phone and it'll take you to the application. It works pretty well. We've had some issues as of late. Like I said, we've had some website issues, so we're working through that. And again, this is for all applications for the planning department, so they're not just COAs. You'll notice on this little slide here, the H in front of these applications denote historic, so you can search for them on the public for the interface for the site. And again, you can scan that QR code and it should take you right to the application. This is the actual portal. Again, very high tech, circa 2000 probably. And that is the web address. So again, if you want to write that down, that'll take you right to the application site. And you can, again, create a username and log in. And I'm going to walk through one of the applications so you can kind of see it here in a second. But I'll just leave that up for a minute. The system is a little bit clunky, I'm not going to lie. A lot of people have trouble with it. So we have some very, very detailed instructions we can email you. They look imposing. It's really just to give you, try and answer as many questions up front as we can. But if you get stuck, please call us. We get those calls all the time, and we're happy to walk you through it. Normally, we have a public computer where if you come in, we can actually sit down and walk you through it. Right now, we don't because of the current, epidemic situation. So right now we'll have to do it virtually, but at some point, again, we will have, access for the public. So I'm going to minimize this real quick. Maybe. Sorry, there we go. And I'm going to pull up. So this is the site in real time. I'm going to go ahead and just log in. But you can search, like I said, any application here. So there's zoning, there's land use, and there's historic preservation. Okay, no, we don't want to do that. So again, there's multiple options there, but we're just going to go into our system. So this is what we see when we log in. Yours is a little bit different, but I just want to give you an idea of sort of how it works. You can search for applications based on where you are. So you can look at Springfield, or if it's a local landmark, you can search by street name, real estate number, tracking number, all that stuff. And how that works is the system assigns a random number in chronological order, and then that becomes the COA number. And so we can track that through our database, and also we have hard copy files. So these are all the ones we have outstanding at the moment. Like I said, we're trying to play catch up from when we were out, so we're a little bit behind. But usually, like I said, we can get through these in a couple days, maybe a week. Let me find one that is. So again, you can search by street. Let's see, let's find something. Let's see what we got here. Okay, so what you're going to see when you first log in is when you create your username and password, it's going to require you to fill in this information. And this will be saved in the system. So every time you log in, this will kind of self-populate. And then if it's your home, it'll also allow you to click this box and fill all this in automatically with your information. The next page is where you're going to put in the property information. So you're going to have your real estate number there. This actually links to the city's mapping system. So you can open this or not, because apparently that's not working. But in theory, it would take you to a map where you could actually see the property. But you're going to put in your property information here. And again, this is where you're going to select what type of COA you're looking at. You got all the ones I kind of talked about. And then we have this kind of catch-all category, which is for re-roofs, which we get a ton of, obviously. And then minor repairs. And I'll explain why it's important, because there's going to be some other requirements on the next page. But in essence, you're going to put in a full description of the work you want to do. Try and be detailed. This thing can hold, I think, 500 words or something like that. But the more detail, the better. Obviously, if we have questions, we'll call you. But if it's minor or if it's something we can do administratively, the more detail you provide, the faster we can turn around that application. If you've been talking to somebody on the phone or emailing somebody who's familiar with your project, you can identify them here, and the system will put our name on it. So when it comes in, whoever's checking that email box will be like, oh, that's for so-and-so. I'll just go ahead and assign it to them. And then, so this is a window replacement application. So you can see it's got these required attachments. The system will not let you submit the COA until you've filled in all these boxes with something. It doesn't necessarily check to see what you're filling it in with, but obviously if you don't provide the information we need, we're just going to call you and say, hey, we need this. But it allows you to upload files. It does have a 5 megabyte limit per slot, so you may need to reduce things in size or put multiple pictures on one page kind of thing to get stuff to fit. For window replacement, there's a specific document called the window survey that is part of what you have to fill out, but you can download that through the system here. And then once you've got all that uploaded, you can also upload any additional documents you may want to provide. And then the final page for the application is basically a disclosure saying that you have to get your application in ahead of time, because if it's not complete, we won't put you on an agenda and you won't get heard that month. So get it to us so we can find out if we need anything else. You click that little box, you get a pop-up that says, congratulations, you filed your application, and then the system sends us an email. So it's not terrible, it's not great, but again, you can do it from home without having to pay to park and come into City Hall or our building, which is the Ed Ball building. So it has its pluses and minuses. So going back to our presentation here, now you've seen our system. We just did that. So that covers the general COA process. I have some specific stuff on solar panels, which apparently is a topic that we're some interested in, but I don't know. I'm going to ask Kelly here if we want to do any questions first on that, because it was kind of intense, and then we can go into some of this stuff.
Looks like we just had a question added to the chat box. Once approved, for how long does the COA remain valid?
Excellent question. So COAs, once they're approved, you have a year to begin the work and then 5 years to complete it. So if you're doing a whole house rehab, basically you have to get started within a year. And then once you do, you've got 5 years to complete it. And we have the ability to extend those deadlines just depending on, if you're making progress and you're having custom siding cut and you're waiting for it to be delivered. Obviously, we're not going to make you go through the process again. But we get, investors that buy houses and then don't ever do anything. So they sit there for 5 years and then we just cancel out the COA. So good question.
Excellent. Well, that's the only chat question that I have. We still have, obviously, more time. I tell you what, instead of having just dead silence, why don't you go ahead forward with the solar updates, and then we can hopefully continue. A few more questions might pop up in that meantime. That work?
Okay. Sounds good. I just don't want to leave anybody behind. So solar panels are kind of an interesting example of where preservation and modern technology have to meet somewhere. Where it doesn't necessarily obviously make sense. Basically, the state of Florida has an ordinance, or a statute rather, that prevents cities from basically saying you can't have solar panels. And not that Jacksonville would, but the idea is that there's sort of a preemptive idea that solar panels are going to be allowed. And there's been a lot of back and forth on how that's been ironed out as where that line is. But basically, like a lot of things in the historic districts, we have the ability to regulate where it goes and how it looks, so long as it doesn't completely negate the benefits of you having panels. We had a committee from our commission back in 2015 form to look at this issue in detail. We had attorneys and contractors and people who sold solar panels all come together and kind of work through this idea. And of course, there is some guidance from the National Park Service because, the National Register deals with historic structures, and obviously they saw this as an issue that's become more and more popular. So it's kind of where some of this came from. And this presentation is really, a report that they put together that came out of that committee. So generally speaking, this was the recommendations that they got. Basically, solar panels should be on the least visible parts of a house, on accessory structures if they can be, and then there's a number of different requirements on how flush they need to be to the roof and things like that. And I'll go through some examples, but in essence, we're looking at how to minimize the impact on the historic structure, because obviously big, tall, bright solar arrays don't necessarily fit in with all the other requirements that we're looking at with regards to, the details of how the molding is put in around the windows. And then we've got, basically anything goes on the roof. So just go to the examples. But a lot of it's based on trying to make sure that what we're regulating doesn't necessarily impact what you're getting as far as the benefit of solar panels. So when we get applications for solar panels, we're looking for, again, where it's going to go on the roof. We regulate the, sort of angle on the roof because, we don't necessarily want, if the roof is pitched a certain way, the solar panels are sticking up and you can see them really well. And then we want to, like I said, verify that what we're doing doesn't completely negate the power generation benefits. So things like power calculations and stuff like that. And then one of the other areas we get into is the wiring. So these panels are all wired together, and then they feed down to either a meter or a battery or some combination thereof. And so the way those wires are, chased along the roof and then how they come down to the house, all of that is stuff that we look at as well. So we're looking for all that kind of information to be provided. Typically, solar installers provide like an aerial picture of the roof and then some kind of rendering of where the panels are going to go. We also look at color for panels and color for framing, again, to try and minimize that impact. I'm going to just go to some of the examples here. So this is dealing with the height. Here you can see you've got panels that are almost flush with the roof versus these which stand up very high. And you can see, obviously from the street, that's going to stand out more than something like this, which blends in pretty well. So those are the kind of things we're looking to address with height. Color is another thing. This tends to be more of an issue with new construction, but also like if you're going to go and put a lot of money's worth of solar panels on top of your roof and the roof is going to need to be replaced in 10 years anyway, a lot of people recommend that you redo the roof at that point. One of the things we're looking at is how much the roof and solar panels match. Obviously, they're not going to match exactly, and a lot of panels are dark, and a lot of them have a certain degree of reflectivity to them. So it's a generality. It's not perfect, but if you've got, a white shingle roof and you're putting blue solar panels on there, that may be something we want to look at. Maybe there's a different manufacturer that makes a different panel that works for you in the same price range. Like anything, I always recommend you get multiple quotes and shop around. Never just trust one contractor or one company. The other thing we're looking at is frame color, and I think I've got a better slide for that. Yeah. So each individual panel is composed of individual cells, and then they're all bolted together on top of the roof. Again, to try and minimize how much they stand out, we're looking at, can you do a darker color? Can they be, similar in color to the panel itself to minimize some of that, obviousness to the design. And then we also look at things like how much of the roof you're covering. So if you're in a situation where you have to cover, or you're asking to cover the front part of the roof, that's something that would have to go to the commission. But the National Park Service guidelines basically talk about, well, if you cover the entire roof, if it's a shingle roof, that actually looks less obtrusive than if you just cover part of it, because then you can see those are the panels versus the actual roof. One of the things we haven't really explored, I'm sure someone's probably going to ask, are the Tesla roofs. Nobody's tried to put one in yet, but there's been a lot of discussion in the preservation circles about it. They have a lot of different designs that are supposed to mimic different roofing materials. I'd be really curious to work with the company that installs them, but we haven't gotten any applications for it yet, so we don't really have any experience with how well it actually mimics it. But from what I've heard, some of them work really well, others don't really get there. But again, it may be better than just flat panels, so we'd be open to discussing it, certainly. We talked about the wiring and wiring boxes, so this is what we're talking about here. These panels have to have, weatherized conduit to run the power through. It's got to come down to the house somehow. So these are the kind of things we're looking at these to be, chased under the panels, and this to be mounted low to the roof, probably a dark color or something that matches the roof as close as possible. They can be painted, that kind of thing. But again, the idea is to minimize that impact on how it looks and how it affects the look of the house. And then lastly, we talked about, there are things as far as reflectivity, and a lot of that, again, is manufacturer-based. None of them are going to be matte finish because they're glass or some kind of plastic or something like that that's going to reflect some light. But there are some that are better than others. And again, it may depend on the manufacturer. There are also some more innovative styles. So Springfield's got a lot of metal roofs. And this is called a peel and stick product, where basically the whole panel is designed and can be cut to fit between the ribs of the roof and sticks to the roof itself, so that really you don't lose the profile of the metal roof, and they don't necessarily cover the seams. So if you need to work on the roof, you can still get at the screws that hold everything together. So I definitely recommend exploring various manufacturers. I'm not by any stretch an expert on solar panels, but I will say that, there are, like a lot of things, big companies that do a lot of work and probably have a system that they use or a manufacturer that they use. And then there are installers that'll put anything on the roof if you find something you like. So, talk to us, talk to the manufacturers, talk to the installers, and there's most likely something that will work that we can approve. And if not, it's something that we can send to the commission and they can consider. Nobody wants to say you can't have solar. It's just a matter of doing it in a way that works for the guidelines and works for the district. You're all probably familiar with TerraWise. They do a lot of work in Springfield. One of the things that they push is, they do these net zero houses that are energy efficient and things like that. And they offer solar as one of the options for their houses. So we see a lot of that on new construction. And again, new construction is treated a little bit differently than historic homes because they're just designed to blend. They don't have to follow the same, level of scrutiny and materials and things like that. So they get a little bit more flexibility, but you do see a lot of it. So it's more common than it used to be sure. And then this is just kind of an example. I talked about how, we at the staff level have things we can approve and then things that have to go to the commission. So a lot of that is tied to very, very specific conditions that have to be applied. So if you want to do 50% of your roof and it follows all of these various conditions, then it's something staff can approve. If it's anything but this, then it goes to the commission. So depending on who you are and depending on how much money you want to spend, depending on how much time you want to invest, it might make sense to try and do all of this stuff rather than go through the commission. Or, if you need the roof to be this many panels and produce this much power, then, it's a month, 6 weeks, and a couple $100 to go get your answer. So I think it's one of those things. We're happy to do what we can. We're limited in capacity, but ideally everyone wants to work towards a goal that makes you happy and works for the district. So that's the basics. I'm, again, happy to answer some questions.
I think we did get another question in the chat box back to the COAs.
Okay.
We had a resident wanting to know, do they need a COA to remove a concrete slab in the backyard?
Um, what I would say is it depends on the slab and where it is, and if in essence, I would give us a call, send us a picture. Probably not, but you never know. There may be a reason for it. A lot of times we'll have people file a COA not just because of the regulatory nature, but because we're also keeping track of the history of these buildings. So even if you're taking up something, there may have been an old garage there, or there may have been something, of note. And it might be good to keep a record of that because we do have files on all these houses. One of the things that we use as a resource is what's called a Sanborn fire insurance map. So back in the little bit before the turn of the century through about the 70s, the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company would make maps of cities all over the place, and they were used to determine the premiums for fire insurance. But they looked at things like roofing material and the footprints of the buildings and the shapes of the buildings and the material the walls were made out of, which is really helpful for us. So we can go back, like I said, to the point usually where the houses are built all the way up to the 70s. So we may be able to see that slab once was, a mother-in-law suite or a garage. And it's good to know if it's there or if it's gone. But things like that typically don't fall under things that require a COA. If you're pouring a new slab where you're making, an improvement, or you're going to put in a gazebo or put in a new garage, that's definitely something we want to look at, but it really depends. The backyard, probably not.
Okay. Are the Sanborn maps and files available to the public? And if so, where?
They are. So there's a couple places you can find them. And I honestly, some of these you just punch into Google and it's the first link that comes up. The University of Florida has a collection of maps from the whole state. And they have some of the ones from Jacksonville. They're all digital and scanned. It does take a little bit to work through them if you've never used them before, and we'd be happy to show you how. The Duval County Library System has another collection of maps. Those are also digital, and you can get those either at the library or you can remotely log in with your library card. And then the Special Collections fourth floor of the downtown library actually has the Florida History Collection, and they have the physical maps there. If you want to actually go and look at the large bound copy, I mean large, they're the size of a small table. And they have special viewing tables, and someone will come and assist you and help you pull them out. And they're very delicate, but yeah, and that you have to basically sign in and turn in your driver's license and everything to get in there. But if you haven't, I definitely recommend going up to the fourth floor. They have all kinds of great stuff, including old phone books and social registries before there were phones, so you can see who lived where going back to the turn of the century. It's really interesting stuff. But if you want to look at that stuff, we'd be happy to show you how. It's not that hard. It's just they're a little different on how to read them and what the various symbols mean and that kind of thing. But yeah, they're available.
Excellent. I have a question, and while I'm speaking it out, I'm going to formulate it as I'm speaking, can you go ahead and show your contact information so people can have quick time to write that down? So a lot of times people reach out to us with concerns or things that are happening in the neighborhood. So if they see, certainly we're not promoting or pushing for people to police their neighbors. That's not what it is. But there are a lot of times when people just don't know any better. And so they try to figure out what the best way to tell what the steps would be for them to make sure that the work is being done correctly. Or in an instance of, I know that there are, there's been discussion about some potential demolitions in the neighborhood and what residents can do to just get involved and everything. Do you have any input or suggestions on that?
Sure. There's a number of ways, probably worth mentioning. Obviously, the city has code enforcement and police and all those good building inspection division folks. Historic preservation, we have our own code officer. His name is Martin Kennelly, very nice gentleman. And his job, in essence, is to deal with violations in the historic districts. So, uh, interesting. So he gets information from us, from people who stop him in the street. He's got a city truck he drives around in. But his main interface is the My Jax interface, where basically if they don't pick up your trash, you can go and put in a complaint and they come pick up your trash. That system's tied to every inch of the city. So if you see something going on that you're convinced is a violation and you want someone to do something about it, you can file it there. If you do email us or call us, we end up filing it in there because that's one of the ways we keep track of these things. And if you do file it in there, you can go and check on the status. They put updates in there as work is done and things like that. You're always welcome to call us or email us. And like I said, usually somebody is available at least 8 to 5, and we'll get in touch with Martin if it's something that's obviously an issue or if it's an emergency. And again, if you just want to know, you can call us and we can kind of fill you in on if we know about it or what's going on. If it's an emergency, obviously, you can call the non-emergency number for the police. You can also call the building inspection division if you think it's work that should have a permit as well. Those guys are out sometimes on the weekends, depending on what they do. So we work very closely with the building department. And so if there is, if somebody's out there replacing windows, that requires a permit. Most things require a permit from the building department as well. So you can call them and they will come out and put a stop work order on the contractors, and then call Martin. He'll come out and deal with the COA side of things. But a lot of times people just call us or email us, and then we go out and deal with it. Most of the time, the work that we interface with is, complicated and expensive and doesn't happen very quickly. There are things that happen, people will take out an entire house worth of windows over a weekend, but a lot of times if someone's doing some work to rebuild their porch, they're not going to get it done in an afternoon. So if you call us, we'll get Martin out there as quick as we can. But most of our enforcement is complaint driven. We don't really drive around looking for issues that much, mostly because we have about 6,000 houses in the 2 districts and 1 code officer. So he's also looking at Riverside and Avondale, and he's just not everywhere all the time. So we do rely on people keeping their eyes out there to help us with this stuff. Because again, it benefits the neighborhood to keep these structures up. So, if you see somebody doing something that's detrimental to a house, or heaven forbid, tearing a house down, that's a problem. But if it's something that dramatic, like I said, you can call the non-emergency number for the police, and they will come out there. And usually they have a contact for someone like the building inspection division who's available. Yeah, usually us, and we'll take it from there.
Excellent. Thank you. Another question just popped up. It says, many of our homes were flipped. If I wanted to see what permits were pulled prior to my purchase, where would I go? She's curious about a couple of things.
Okay. If it's related to specifically historic preservation stuff, the online portal, we started using that in 2017. So if it's in the last couple of years, you can actually go on there and search by the street and find your address and see if anything's been filed for us for COAs. And if it's older than that, you can call us. We actually have a database. It's just not available online. And then the building inspection division, which is on the City of Jacksonville's website through the planning department, they actually have a web interface for building permits, and you can search by address, and it'll pull up all the permits going back to, I think, the 90s for houses. They may not all be populated of all the information for the really old ones, but you can usually find, anything that's been pulled. If it had a permit, it should be there. And that's, if you've got a title insurance company for a house, they're going there to find that information as well. So that's the most up-to-date recent information. If, the house has a new roof and there's no permit, it's not a permitted roof. So I can find the link for you while we're talking.
Excellent. Very helpful.
Generally, coj.net is our address. So if you haven't been to the city's website, that's the place to start. And that covers everything in the city. We're obviously under the city department tab here. And
there's a good search bar. I love a search bar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes it very helpful.
So Building Inspection Division, a lot of people call them BID, the acronym. I said planners love acronyms. Come on. Hey, the link's not working. So you can also get through up here. There we go. And then, so permit and inspection information. And this is that online system. So you can sign in as a guest and you can, like I said, do searches and you can search permit by address and that'll have, randomly a bunch of addresses. But let's do, it's a good one. I don't use the public side very often, so it's a little different for us. Not east. And we'll do, because I think thinking the one on 4th. Or not. Just 4. There we go. All of our systems, I recommend putting in the least amount of information possible. You get fancy, it can't find it. So this lists all the permits for this address, and you can sort them. Maybe you can't. I can sort them. But it should be in chronological order. So you can see going back to 89 in this case. And then each prefix is basically the type of permit. So P for plumbing, E for electric, M for mechanical, R for roof, B for building. And with each of these, if you're logged in, I think you can, well, there you go. So this gives you the information on the contractor, the property, and then it should have the overview of what was done. So, here obviously a shower stall was put in. The other thing you'll notice, depending on, this is interior work, so it doesn't have anything about historic preservation, but we go back, just so you guys understand how we regulate things. Roofing permit, under prereqs, maybe. It's got an option for historical, and they're going to check to see that you have a COA. And if you don't, they won't issue the permit. So a lot of times if work was done not quite legally, you may find a permit in like temporary status, and none of this is filled out. That means they basically turned in the permit piece of paper, but then nobody inspected it and nobody finalized the permit. So the work was done. They had a permit. They didn't actually finish it, so it's still not legal.
Excellent. This is very helpful. Okay.
Good. Glad.
Yeah, very much so. Well, just as a reminder, we did record this webinar and we're going to put it up. I'm going to try to upload it to our YouTube channel so this can be referenced later as well. And then, of course, Christian and his staff are available, like I said, through email and phone, fairly easy to get a hold of. And then we'll also continue our historic preservation workshops later this summer, and we'll be in communication with that. Wanted to make sure that we thanked our sponsor, Amanda Searle with Root Realty. And like I said, Christian, I can't tell you how much we appreciate the time. Like I said, I know it's hard after hours. It's dinner time. I don't know about you. And we appreciate the time you put in, and very serious. It was a great presentation, very informative, and
Thank you.
The time for the Q&A as well. I've not seen any more pop-up questions. I'm seeing a couple of thank yous on the chat and stuff like that. And so, but other than that, like I said, you gave your contact information. So I would urge everyone to reach out to you and your staff if that's the best way to do it, is just to get you on the phone and ask some questions. So.
Yeah, I'm going to just apologize in advance. I'm like never in my office. So if you call and you're looking for me specifically, you probably should email me because it's going to be faster because I carry an iPad around the office. So, but I'm in a ton of meetings. So if you get my voicemail, don't feel bad.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time and your enthusiasm, and we hope this was helpful. So anyway,
thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your night. Thanks, guys.